Welcome to the news today, to the special edition of the final edition of 2015. And we're starting, of all the stories, 2015 may be remembered as the year of the Islamic State, which managed to strike in the heart of Europe, killing 130 people in coordinated attacks in Paris. But the IS may have awoken a sleeping giant, with the West increasing efforts to degrade and ultimately destroy the group, which now appears on the defensive. Our correspondents weighed in on a year of global terror.
The old quote, "My enemy's enemy is my friend," seems to have been given a whole new meaning in 2015. The Americans recruited the Europeans to fight IS, which fights the Assad regime, which fights the Kurds, who are fighting Turkey, which is now at odds with the Russians, who supports Iran, and Hezbollah, who supports the Houthis, which are fighting the Saudis. They established a vast anti-terror coalition to fight IS, which is fighting them all. With so many differences on almost each and every subject, how long will it take for this long list of frenemies to turn against each other? Or in other words, can those artificial alliances last even until the end of 2016?
In 2015, we saw how terror was spread not just in the streets, but also in people's minds. A few weeks ago, we saw how false alarm caused an emergency landing in Kenya, not to mention evacuation of the Hanover football stadium in Germany. According to UK statistics, 35% of the population said they're very worried from terror attack. Only 4% said they are not worried at all.
If the global war on terror faced a new challenge this year, it's the changing face of terrorism. The so-called Islamic State in Syria and Iraq has turned the once secretive acts of terrorism into stylized, highly publicized visual productions, turning underground activity into a means of mass persuasion. And in Israel, once organized terror groups evolved into a series of lone wolf attackers, forcing authorities to create a new profile of terrorists, no longer the disadvantaged and the poor, brainwashed by a terror group, but often educated family men with work permits within Israel. It's a new face of terrorism in the country, and the Middle East at large has yet to map out, and a risk it is struggling to cope with.
It was a year that began ominously. On January 7th, Saeed and Sharif Kouachi stormed into the offices of the Charlie Hebdo satirical newspaper in Paris, killing 12 people in a shooting rampage, including cartoonists, newspaper editors, and a policeman.
According to one witness, the shooters were shouting Allahu Akbar, and they said they wanted to avenge the Prophet.
The Kouachi brothers had links to Al-Qaeda in Yemen. 2 days later, an associate of theirs, Ahmadi Koulibaly, shot 4 people dead in a kosher grocery in Paris. 15 hostages were freed when police moved in and killed the terrorist. Koulibaly had pledged allegiance beforehand to the Islamic State. The attacks in Paris led to an outpouring of solidarity both in France and from around the world, as leaders flew to the French capital. But it was just the beginning. 2015 was not a particularly good year for Islamic State. While in May the group did capture both the Iraqi city of Ramadi and Palmyra in Syria, IS was driven out of the Syrian border town of Kobani in January. It lost the northern Iraqi town of Sinjar in November, and most of Ramadi has been retaken by the Iraqi army over the past few days.
ISIL's already lost about 40% of the populated areas it once controlled in Iraq, and it's losing territory in Syria.
But while there were territorial setbacks for IS in the Middle East, 2015 saw a shift in strategy for the group, which began to look outwards. Around the world, terror attacks were carried out in the name of IS, some by self-proclaimed sympathizers, others were given orders from commanders in Syria. Many of these attacks targeted Muslims. In June, 27 people were killed in the bombing of a Shiite mosque in Kuwait City. That same day, 40 others were murdered in a mass shooting at a beach resort in Tunisia. IS was also linked to suicide bombings in Turkey. 102 people were killed in a blast at a peace rally in Ankara in October. 33 others had been killed in an attack near the Syrian border in July. Last month, up to 43 people were killed in a series of IS suicide bombings in Beirut. The majority of Western attention, however, was focused on attacks against its own citizens. IS claimed responsibility for the downing of a Russian airliner on October 31st over the Sinai Peninsula. All of the plane's 224 passengers perished. It had taken off from Sharm el-Sheikh, a popular resort destination for European tourists. The Islamic State terror cell, which killed 130 people in Paris on November 13th, was made up of primarily European-born terrorists who had spent time in Syria. In the wake of these attacks, as well as those in January, French society may now be changed forever.
We should have the right to strip French nationality from someone who is convicted of violating the fundamental interests of the nation or convicted of a terrorist act, even if they were born here.
The attacks reached across the Atlantic as well, when earlier this month, 2 Islamic State supporters, a married couple with a child, killed 14 people at a health services center in San Bernardino, California. While gains are being made against IS on the ground in the territory it controls, the ideas that it promotes constitute the major challenge to liberal societies everywhere.
Yes, and to discuss this a little bit further, with me here in the studio is Ali Waqt, Senior Middle East Analyst for I-24 News. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
And also Defense Correspondent Shaiban Ari. Good evening. You know, gentlemen, this year we can say that maybe, I don't remember a year that terror just dominated the headlines each and every day. And I don't remember this since 2001, since September 11. And, you know, I'm trying to think if this war is started with the, let's say, spring, the Arab Spring, or did it start way back in 2001 in September 11?
Lucy, the Islamic State, if we are talking about the Islamic State attacks, was created, the origin was 2007 with Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi, who decided to launch the organization with a different name, but with already the tendency to have a territorial agenda, not only a terror attack, traditional terror attack, as we know. This is why I don't think that we are going with all the territory that President Obama talked about, the loss of the Islamic State, that the terror wave of the Islamic State will stop. I think the more they are on the defensive at the territorial level, the more we are going to see these terror attacks that we saw in Kuwait, that we saw in Beirut, in Paris, in New York, in the U.S. and elsewhere. More of these kind of attack in 2016, and I'm afraid also afterwards. We should make no mistake. At the last weeks, we were a little bit satisfied with the fact that the Islamic State is on the defensive. They were losing territory in both Syria and in Iraq, but we do forget that they are gaining territory not less significant in Libya, in Africa, in Afghanistan. The Taliban is already worried from the fact that the Islamic State is gaining more and more influence in Afghanistan.
You know, I want to take this point that the war didn't end, of course, and will not end any time, not in the near future at least. But let's talk, it was also the year where everybody criticized Barack Obama. Everybody criticized the lack of foreign policy of the biggest power in the world.
You know, everyone did have a lot of criticism from Barack Obama. I'll try and maybe explain his point of view or his argument. I believe that the world should be a little more sympathetic to his point of view. If you look at the American position and if you look at how we got to this state, I would actually argue that the real sea change, the major turning point was 2001, and really perhaps you could say the overreaction of the Bush administration to what happened on 9/11, not to diminish what happened on 9/11, but the decision to basically invade 2 countries. That led to what happened with Abu Mus'ab al-Zarqawi and the eventual establishment of what we know today as the Islamic State, the invasion of Iraq, and the withdrawal, which was apparently not handled as it should have been. That led to a certain vacuum into which poured all sorts of forces. And I think you have to talk about the media a lot when you talk about the ability of such an organization to project its ideas around the world. That is how they were able to spread to places in Africa and even to Afghanistan to replace the different Islamic radical regime that already was established before there, the Taliban. That is how they are able to reach the United States, San Bernardino, suburbs of major urban centers like Los Angeles. This is an organization that understands media, that is able to project its message very effectively, unfortunately, and I think that's where the answer.
You know, if we're trying to understand how Barack Obama dealt with the terror, or how the United States deal with the wave of terror that the world is experiencing, one of the critiques is the lack of understanding of the Arab culture, of the Muslim culture. Is it the lack of understanding? Is it somebody in the Capitol Hill doesn't understand what is happening in the Middle East, or they just don't want to understand, or they do understand and they just don't want to act?
No, I think that it was both. At the end, it was both of them. They did not want to act. They don't want to act right now, as everybody expect from the biggest superpower in the world. If there is really a will to eliminate the Islamic State, but yes, there is a lack of understanding. If the Americans thought at the mid-2000s that they can just export the Western democracy to the Arab world, they understand that it will not work. And in my opinion, I'm afraid there are some Americans that still believe that the solution for all the problems of the Arab world was in bringing this democracy to the Arab world. The Arab world will not accept this Western democracy. The tradition, the religion of the Muslim community doesn't allow them to, even the liberals in the Arab world, who seek for democracy, it is not this democracy that they are seeking to.
And no, continue.
Yeah, and I think the combination between the lack of understanding and the late reaction of the Americans will bring us in the situation that this war against the Islamic State is far from being terminated.
And if we would like to look at the general picture, or the picture in general, basically the IS, or the fight of the IS, or the Muslim world, is fighting itself before it's fighting the West. It's fighting its own tradition, it's fighting its own tribes, its own beliefs, before it's even starting to discuss democracy in the West or Western culture.
When people who talk to Islamic State leaders basically refer to this point, really the priority, they say, is first of all the Islamic world, the Shiites, and also everybody they consider a heretic before even Israel or other countries. They have been openly threatening the West and Israel very recently, but really it's a matter of priority. And to touch on what Ali mentioned, I think what you were saying also connects to what we were talking about earlier with President Obama. I think he does understand, as opposed to, say, the Bush administration, that the Western democracy is not necessarily the answer to all of these problems in the Middle East. I think he realizes that more American involvement in this issue is not what he wants, at least. And there is a lot of criticism for him on that point, but that is his policy and is sticking to it. No doubt
Yes,
about
gentlemen, thank you very much, and have a Happy New Year.
Happy New
Thank
Year.
you. Thank you for that.